Welcome back to the Durst Show. Lots of things have happened this week, but we're going to have an unusual show today. I'm going to be talking about the misuses and the weaponization of language, of words. It sounds pedantic. I guarantee you, not only will it not be pedantic, but a lot of you will be really mad at me. I know that. I know I'm not going to win any popularity contests with some of the things I'm going to say. The only people who will support me are those who are deeply, deeply committed to truth, whatever the consequences. So, words. I'm going to talk particularly about four words that are in the news. Two of them have to do with Jeffrey Epstein, and I said I wouldn't be focusing on him or Ghislaine Maxwell, but it's the words that I'm focusing on. So, the four words I'm going to focus on are pedophile, which Jeffrey Epstein has been called, trafficking, which he has been accused of, genocide, which Israel is being accused of now, and starvation, which Israel is being accused of. Every one of those words is being misused. I can add another word as well under the rubric of trafficking: client, the client list. Let me start with Jeffrey Epstein. We'll spend just a few minutes there, and then we'll move to the major subject here, which involves genocide and starvation. So, how many of you out there have heard Jeffrey Epstein described by newspapers, by the media, by CNN, by you name it, as a convicted pedophile? Nothing could be further from the truth. He was convicted of having sex with a 17-year-old, 17 and 8 or 9 months, almost 18, and a 19-year-old. That's what he pleaded guilty to. Even when he was accused, and of course there was no trial, he was not accused of anything even close to pedophilia. Let me explain to you what pedophile means. And there is a accepted medical, psychiatric, legal definition of pedophile. Pedophilia is a psychiatric disorder in which an adult or older adolescent experiences a primary or exclusive sexual attraction to, and this is the key phrase, prepubescent children. Prepubescent children. Although girls typically begin the process of puberty at age 10 or 11, at boys at 11 or 12, psychiatric diagnostic criteria for pedophilia extend the cutoff point for prepubescence to age 13. Now, no one, even Jeffrey Epstein's most extreme accuser, has ever accused him of actually having sex or even wanting to have sex with anybody who fits the definition of being a pedophile. It's just not true. And yet the word is thrown around. The vast majority of people that Epstein was accused of having sexual contact with were 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, very young. Terrible. I'm not defending that at all. I think that he committed crimes. I have no doubt about that. He pleaded guilty. He committed crimes. But it's bad enough what he did. Why call him a pedophile when he's not? And the word is just thrown around as if it has a colloquial meaning. It doesn't have a colloquial meaning. It has a technical meaning, a meaning in law, a meaning in psychiatry, a dictionary meaning. It means sex with prepubescent or sexual desire for prepubescent girls or boys. That's what it means. Lots and lots and lots of people have sex with 15, 16, 17-year-old people. Mostly they're 15, 16, and 17. And in fact, the definition of pedophile excludes anybody who's within 5 years of the age of the person. So if the person is 15 and or the person is 11 or 12 even, and the boy who has sex with her is 13 or 14, that's not regarded as pedophilia. I can easily imagine that it would be, but it's not. So let's stop using that term. Jeffrey Epstein was not a pedophile. Ghislaine Maxwell did not help anybody commit pedophilia. She may have, helped him in different ways committing crimes, because crimes, anybody under 18. Let's remember also that Florida is unique, or not unique, but rare among states, defining the age of consent at 18. Many states have it much lower. 16 is very common. Virtually every country in the world has an age of consent lower than 18 because they don't want to criminalize so many millions of people who are having sex with 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds. Some of them have Romeo and Juliet statutes. If you have sex with somebody who's 15, but you're only 18, you're not guilty. All right. But however you want to debate this issue, and it's a complicated issue, it's made particularly complicated by abortion issues because liberals want to lower the age where a girl can consent to have an abortion without getting permission from parents. Liberals want that to be 14, 15, 16. So they're confused about what the age of consent should be for sex. But nobody that I know of, no rational person, says that having sex with a 17-year-old is pedophilia. And that's what Epstein was convicted of. So let's stop using that term when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. You can use it when it comes to other people, and there are plenty of people guilty of pedophilia. All right, that gets us to the next term, trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein did not traffic anybody. Trafficking means bringing people and taking them across state lines or taking them to different places for purposes of commercial sex, for purpose of making money. So it's an adjunct to prostitution. You get 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, you basically enslave them, and you make them serve as prostitutes. You're their pimp. Jeffrey Epstein didn't do that. He was too selfish. He didn't do it for the money. He was, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The most he did, this is the most he was accused of, was having sexual contact with young post-pubescent, adolescent girls, and maybe lending them to friends like Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew claims, denies it, of course, but the woman who accused him claimed she was like 17 or 18 at the time, and that she did it voluntarily and earned $15,000 doing it. Whatever else it may be, and it's no good, it's terrible. If it happened, it's not trafficking. There's just no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein ever trafficked anybody. So the two things that everybody says about him are simply false. Other things that they say about him are true. He did have sex or sexual contact. There is a dispute about whether he ever had sexual intercourse with anybody, or whether he was just into touching and happy endings. But that doesn't matter as a matter of law. The question, he did have that kind of sexual contact with people in Florida under the age of 18 and in other places under the age of consent. So it's bad enough what he did, but don't make up stories. It's so important that we use language in a correct manner. I'm not a pedantic when it comes to that. I'm a lawyer, yeah. So I do think that you have to use language properly. All right, so now we turn to today's subject at hand, Israel and Gaza. Let's be as clear as anybody can be. Anybody who accuses Israel of committing genocide in Gaza is accusing the United States of committing genocide in Dresden, in Hamburg, in Berlin, is accusing the United States and England of committing genocide in many other parts of the world, accusing the United States of committing genocide when it ended the war with Japan by dropping 2 atomic bombs, is accusing the United States and NATO of genocide in the wars that it fought since that time, because what Israel is doing is absolutely no different, and in many respects far better than what any of these other countries did. Israel warns civilians before it attacks areas that contain civilians. Hamas hides its terrorists among civilians, and Israel takes every effort to try to avoid killing civilians. That's not genocide. You might say they don't do enough. Okay, reasonably we can disagree with that. There was a good article in the New York Times yesterday about that, an op-ed, which says, Israel's gone too far, but you don't accuse it of genocide. Genocide is what the Nazis did to Jewish babies. taking 1 million Jewish babies with no military justification, bringing them in from all over the world, taking them in from the Isle of Rhodes, from Salonika, bringing them to Auschwitz, putting them in gas chambers, subjecting them to killing squads. That's genocide. That's how the term was defined by a Jewish lawyer after the Second World War. You cannot use that term to describe Israel's efforts to prevent a recurrence of October 7th. You can accuse it of going too far. Yes, you could accuse it of perhaps sometimes taking military action against targets that don't satisfy the rules of proportionality. Rules of proportionality say that when you're attacking a military target, the value of the military target has to be proportional to the number of civilians you anticipate being killed. I happen to think that Israel satisfies that criteria. It has the lowest ratio of civilian deaths to terrorist deaths of any country in the history of modern warfare. You can disagree with me on that. You cannot call it genocide. When you do, you lose your credibility. So you now have two Israeli organizations who are calling what Israel is doing genocide. One of them is Doctors Without Walls. Don't even take that seriously. Doctors Without Walls is a Hamas front. It works for Hamas. It needs Hamas. It is Hamas. So it's like Hamas saying Israel is committing genocide. So ignore them. The other is B'Tselem, which is an Israeli organization. I've worked with them. I've worked against them. That calls itself a human rights organization. Nothing could be further from the truth. It has nothing to do with human rights. It is a hard left, anti-Israel organization that would never defend the right of conservatives or right-wingers or people who are falsely accused in the army. It has one goal: to delegitimate Israel's activities around the world. And it calls what Israel is doing genocide. Ignore it. Ignore it. It's foolish. It's idiotic. But why is it important? Because these two organizations, B'Tselem and Doctors Without Borders, have also accused Israel of starving the civilians in Gaza. Okay, that's a different issue. But let me start by saying any organization that has accused Israel of genocide loses all credibility in accusing Israel of starvation. Let's get to the starvation issue. You all know the fable, I think it's a Grimm's fairy tale, of the boy who cried wolf. You know, the boy who cried wolf over and over again. And when the wolf actually came, nobody took him seriously because he had cried wolf so many times. Let's apply that to Gaza. Amnesty International, one of the groups that accuses Israel of genocide and starvation, accused Israel on October 7th of being responsible for what happened on October 7th. Harvard's chapter of Amnesty International joined a letter blaming everything that happened on October 7th, the rapes, the beheadings, the attacks on children, the rapes of children, all of that blamed on Israel. That's Amnesty International, so don't take them seriously. Look, two of these organizations, Doctors Without Borders and Amnesty International, have won the Nobel Peace Prize. That doesn't tell you much about these organizations. It tells you something about the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a worthless piece of trash when it is applied to organizations like that. And so you get these organizations claiming that Israel is starving the Gazans. These organizations and others have claimed that Israel is starving Gaza since October 8th, 2023. How many times have we heard it? We've heard claims that there's starvation, and then we've seen pictures of not only Gaza civilians, but terrorists, Hamas terrorists, gorging themselves, pigging out on food, getting fat on food. And then there was a period of time when there was less food. And as I put it, and people didn't like it, but it was true, during that period of time, the citizens of Gaza weren't getting dessert. They were getting a first dish, they were getting a main dish, they were getting their bread, but they weren't getting dessert. There was no starvation. There was a little bit of hunger. Everybody wants dessert. But, you know, as Mike Pompeo and others have reminded us, how many times in history have countries who have been invaded and attacked and lost so many people as Israel did on October 7th, how many times in history are those countries then fed their enemies. No, the United States didn't feed Germany. The United States didn't feed Japan. People died in Tokyo. People died in Berlin of starvation because their own countries didn't provide them with enough food. And that's what's going on in Gaza. There was enough food. Hamas stole it. Now, there's a State Department study that says, well, maybe they didn't steal all that much. No, that's not true. And there's all kinds of data. There are films. There is evidence. There's testimony about how Hamas has stolen food and also raised the prices of food and gets the money from the people for selling the food for extreme prices and uses that money to help dig more tunnels and bring more weapons to kill more Jews. Again, you can quarrel. You can say Israel should do more to alleviate what has now become a shortage of food. Yes, there is now a shortage of food. It's not a systematic starvation. It's a shortage of food. And Israel is trying all kinds of ways to provide the food without compromising the security of their soldiers. Soldiers are killed every day. Israeli soldiers are killed every single day. And Israel has the right to try to minimize the death of its soldiers. And so it's trying airlifts. It's trying to create a new organization along with the United States to distribute food. It's trying everything to distribute food. It's not always succeeding. And the people in Gaza are hungry. And they run and they attack sometimes the food givers. And in order to protect themselves, there has to be return. There has to be the use of non-lethal weapons or shooting up in the air. And occasionally that results in a death. The number of deaths is tiny compared to the number of people in Gaza. And so to call it genocide, to call it systematic starvation is simply wrong. In war, there is a fog. And during the fog of war, people die. When Israel fought in the 1967 war, lots of young Israeli soldiers died of thirst because they didn't know how to deal with the thirst in the desert. And so Israeli soldiers quenched their thirst with cold water, and then the thirst was quenched, and they didn't realize that physiologically that doesn't save their lives, and many died. A friend of mine helped invent a technique for requiring these young soldiers to drink sweet water, sugared water, syrupy water, so it didn't quench their thirst. So they had to keep drinking and drinking and drinking, and that kept them alive. During war, people die. And during war, people die of starvation. You know how many people died of starvation during the Second World War? Hundreds of thousands. But nobody accused the United States or Great Britain of systematically starving the Germans to death. They would have if they could have. I mean, let me give you a hypothetical that I gave to my students. If, in fact, when the Jews learned that 6 million Jews were being murdered in Auschwitz, and they started to kill civilians in order to prevent that from happening, would that have been justified or not? To kill 100 or 1,000 civilians to save 6 million civilians? These are the terrible costs of war. You can be critical, but you cannot use the word genocide. And if you do, nobody should listen to you. If you use the word genocide, you have disqualified yourself from serious discourse. You are either a fool or a knave, probably both. So do not weaponize the term genocide. It's an important term, and it has to be reserved for those who would systematically, on racial grounds, try to destroy a whole race of people, like what happened in Africa and other places in the world, like what may be happening in China with the Uyghurs and in other parts of the world. It's not happening in the Middle East. It's not happening in Gaza. And anyone who says it is should lose all their credibility. Yes, Amnesty International, no credibility. Physicians Without Borders, no credibility. B'Tselem, no credibility. Other organizations, newspapers that use the term genocide, no credibility. And if you use the word genocide, nobody should believe you about starvation. That's not only crying wolf, that's crying tiger, wolf, and lion falsely, and then accusing Israel of something that it's not guilty of. Even if there is, at some areas of the country, some degree of starvation, nobody's going to believe it if it comes from the same people who said that there was starvation on October 8th and October 10th and November 10th and January 10th. This cry of starvation has been a constant misuse and weaponization of words. When it was false then, it was believed because, anti-Semites believe anything negative about Jews. People say to me, how can it be false if everybody believes it's true? Everybody in the Christian world for years believed that Jews took Christian babies and killed them and used their blood to bake matzah for Passover. That was a widespread belief. It was called the blood libel. And it was believed by everybody. It was preached in Poland, in sermons. It was preached in other parts of the world. It was in books. It was in manuscripts. And it was false. So when Jews are accused of something like genocide or starvation, you have to look at history. You have to look back at the history of false accusations. And that history has to alert you to the crucial credibility issues that arise. Now, let's find out the facts. If Israel is doing something wrong, by all means, criticize it. By all means, condemn it. But condemn it for what it's doing, not for what it's being accused of falsely. And that's the key. Israel is not committing genocide. Israel is not using hunger as a weapon of war. People die. They die, especially civilians do, when the terrorists use the civilians as human shields. You know when else civilians die? When Hamas builds tunnels and then announces that only Hamas members can use these tunnels, which are loaded with food and are loaded with medicine and loaded with water. Only Hamas members can use these tunnels as shelters against Israeli bombs, but the civilians have to stay above ground and have to endure the potential bombings. Now, I'm not going to call that genocide by Hamas, but it's certainly a form of discriminating against civilians. And that's why Israel can't end this fight without destroying every single tunnel, making them concrete, making it impossible. My brother-in-law, who's a very funny guy, used to wear a shirt that was a takeoff on Save the Planet, and he said, pave the planet. All right, it was a joke. Maybe it was a bad joke, but it was a joke. Gaza has to be paved. Pave Gaza. You have to make sure there is no opportunity in Gaza for there to be tunnels. And you have to make sure that Hamas does what the Israeli IDF does. The IDF builds tunnels, it builds secure places, and these places are open to every Israeli, an Arab Israeli, Christian Israeli, Jewish Israeli, children, adults. Everybody gets to go into the shelters. Hamas has to do the same thing. They have built shelters only for their fighters. They have quite deliberately left the civilians in harm's way in order to increase the number of deaths, because that's their biggest weapon. Their biggest weapon is death. They've said it. You can see it. Go on memory.com and you'll see Hamas people saying death is our big weapon. These people are shaheeds, they're martyrs. They're dying in order to destroy Israel. And that tactic is working because Hamas understands the media better than many other people do. It understands that when they force Israel to a choice between being killed or killing some civilians who are being used as human shields, and if Israel opts for what every country would opt for, they will be condemned in the court of opinion, condemned by international organizations, condemned by Amnesty International, condemned by academics, condemned by the New York Times, condemned by CNN. That doesn't make it wrong what they did. It makes it wrong for the condemners to apply a double standard. So let's apply a single standard. Let's use words carefully. Send me your letters. Tell me what you think of my analysis of the use of these words. And don't tell me, oh, don't compare Jeffrey Epstein to Israel. Okay, I'm only using it as an example of the misuse of words. I'm not making any comparisons. So let's talk about the use of words. All right, now let's turn to some of the letters, see if any of them deal with the use of words. Oh, a couple of letters. Obviously, the show was about the failure to give the death penalty to the horrible killer of those four wonderful college students. And in the process, I talked about the Leopold and Loeb case where the death penalty was not imposed. So here's a letter. The victims of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb was Robert Bobby Franks, the 14-year-old son of wealthy Chicago watch manufacturer Jacob Franks, and the second cousin of Richard Loeb. Clarence Darrow did a masterful defense, getting him life instead of the death penalty. All right, you got it half right. And I'm nobody can be absolutely sure of this, but biographers and others who have looked at the case have said they were paid an enormous fee to try to avoid the death penalty. And the fee was accounted for except for $50,000, which went missing. And the theory, Chicago, 1920s, you know what Chicago was. The theory is that Clarence Darrow, either directly or indirectly, put that $50,000 in the pocket of the judge. He was known for bribing. He was known for intimidating. He was not an ethical lawyer. And his biographers, the honest biographers, know that. He actually admitted engaging in unethical conduct, saying he was just leveling the playing field against prosecutors. So Clarence Darrow has never been my hero. He's a great, great lawyer, but his ethics were highly questionable. And the result of the Leopold and Loeb case, because again, if anybody ever deserved the death penalty, it was two brilliant people who killed in order just to know what it felt like to kill. My God, that was, I mean, these were intelligent people who made a thoughtful decision to do this as a mind experiment. But they were saved at a time when everybody was getting the death penalty. When a person robbed a mom and pop store and the gun went off accidentally, death penalty. But these kids didn't. $50,000 seems likely to me. Okay. All you need for visual evidence of starvation in Gaza is to see how well-fed the freedom fighters are. Not a one under 170 pounds, mainly 20 or 40 pounds heavier. They're not starving. No, I think that's true. And when you look at the videos, you see the one picture that was on the cover of the New York Times of a clearly starving child. But it then turns out, without the Times acknowledging it, that this boy had a genetic disease that caused him to look the way he did, that the starvation was not the cause of the bulging stomach and the whatever. And we'd have to know that about all the 14 people who allegedly died of starvation. People die of starvation in Massachusetts General Hospital if they can't digest the food, if they can't take intravenous. And so people die of starvation on the streets of every city in New York. So we have to know what the numbers are, what the statistics are, and what the actual causes of death are. Can the governor of Idaho overturn the penalty to a death sentence? Occasionally you get a question with a clear answer, and the answer is no. Once the death penalty, once the person was sentenced, the double jeopardy clause, which isn't applicable to the states, but every state has its own double jeopardy clause, would preclude it. I'm curious about your perspective on William Buckley Jr. I recently watched your interviews and debates with him and would appreciate your insights. I like Bill. He and I disagreed about everything. We fought like children. We debated at Harvard. We debated on PBS. We debated in audiences all over the country. I called him my favorite conservative. He called me his favorite liberal. And he was the one who had the courage to go after Pat Buchanan and call him an anti-Semite. And when he said in an article that what Buchanan has done and said amounts to anti-Semitism, that changed the debate within the conservative community. So Bill Buckley was something of a hero to me. We could never be close friends. We were so different. And, he came from such a different background, a different But I liked him, and he liked me. Good. Let me ask you how you feel after you get a client off that you know committed a murder or two. One particular case comes to mind. Do you at least lose sleep over it? I lose sleep when I lose a case involving somebody who might be innocent. That's when I lose sleep. It's part of the legal system. Better 10 guilty, go free than one innocent be wrongly confined. In the O.J. Simpson case, we didn't win, they lost. Every possible mistake you can make, the prosecutors made, from the top prosecutor assigning these two people to try the case who are not qualified to try it, to the selection of the jury, to the police planting evidence in order to frame a guilty man. So don't blame the defense lawyers. We did our job and we did it well. Blame the prosecutors, blame the police. They're the ones who resulted in the acquittal in that case. See you tomorrow.